But for tonight, I'd like to tell you about Stuart Cohen, who will be interviewing Faye and Jonathan Kellerman. He is a well-known motivational speaker, entrepreneur, passionate keynoter, and inspiring business coach and master sales trainer, along with the lover of Memphis. He'll be here chatting with Faye and Jonathan Kellerman, who are the only married couple ever to appear on the New York Times bestseller list together. Jonathan's first novel in 1985, When the Bough Breaks, was published to enormous critical and commercial success, and since then, he has published at least one best-selling novel every year. Faye's first novel, The Ritual Bath, was published in 1986, also to wide critical and commercial acclaim, and there are now well over 20 million copies of her novels in print internationally, and they're here. So please sit back and enjoy our guests. If you should have questions for Faye or Jonathan, there were cards out front. You could write them down, and if we have time at the end, we can pull them up. I can pass some cards around also if you didn't get one. And we'll hopefully be able to answer as many as we can from the audience. And just so you know, tonight's event is in partnership with 100newfamilies.com move to Memphis, and our dessert reception and book signing after the conversation is sponsored by RBW Investing LLC. I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors and our Passport to Discovery patrons for their support. So now please let me welcome Stuart Cohen and Faye Kellerman and Jonathan Kellerman.
Welcome to Memphis.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having us.
So what have you done so far in town before we get into it?
We slept a lot in the hotel room of the Shamus today, but it was a very nice hotel room. We're at the Peabody and we took a little walk around. It's wonderful to be here, and the orange was kind of accidental, but maybe there was kismet involved, or it was Bashir that I should wear this today, so congratulations. Memphis.
Now,
what? Oh, we got some Mississippi fans. Okay, next time
Orange is for UT.
Orange is for UT. Oh, blue is for Tennessee. Okay, you gotta school me, guys.
you got some blue in there. But so you're in town to visit us now.
Yeah.
But you've got something big happening tomorrow too. You're judging a very important annual event. Would you tell us about it?
Well, I have learned that there's kosher barbecue in Memphis for many years, so we get to be the judge. We get to judge barbecue. And I'm extremely flattered that you guys would entrust this sacred task to a Yankee. I have no qualifications other than decades of gluttony, but I hope to do my best. The other thing we learned about are the ducks at the Peabody. I have no idea. I had never heard of it. We came into the hotel and the doorman said, "Oh, you get to see the ducks." And so we learned about the ducks.
And you saw the ducks.
We saw the ducks.
We saw the ducks, and we had a great time. So we've been here briefly, looking forward to it, and we appreciate your coming out. We'd love to answer questions.
Yeah.
Oh?
Yeah. Well, there's one more thing that you're doing when you're in town too, right?
We got to go to Graceland, right? I told Stuart I had an Elvis spotting when I was about 20 years old, coming home from UCLA, studying at the library in 1970 or so, and I saw this Stutz Blackhawk car in a driveway. And it was this luxury car they made that was basically a mutated Pontiac Grand Prix. Being a car guy, I knew that the only people in LA who had one were Elvis and Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. at this point. So I took a look, and there he was sitting there with the sideburns. An Elvis sighting.
You don't know what he was doing there, though.
No, he was visiting someone in an apartment.
And we'll leave it at that.
Let's start with family. You have 4 children. So introduce your family to us.
Okay, I'll take this one. Our 4 children are remarkable. And the reason they're remarkable is 3 out of the 4 have the same birthday. 2 on August 31st, 1 4 hours later is on September 1st. And if you go 9 months back, there's with the Thanksgiving turkey, but we don't have to get into that. And Jonathan is a PhD in psychology. As a matter of fact, he did that for 14 years before he hit being a novelist. And a child psychologist at that, and he was very, we were very child-centered, so we used to take them out for their birthday. And being as we were good parents, we used to, you know, how you get the cake and you sing happy birthday. One piece of cake and one happy birthday was not enough. Each child got their individual cake and their individual happy birthday song. So the first time we sang it, the restaurant looks around, they bring out the cake, we sing happy birthday, everybody claps. The second time they bring it out, you get a few quizzical looks and a couple of claps. By the third time, they're saying what people won't do for a free piece of cake. Now, this is a true story. A woman actually turned around to me after the third time and said, "Are they triplets?" The oldest is 14, the youngest is 7, so they're, you know, the 14, it was like
14, 7, and 1.
It was like 18, it was 18, 11, and 4, and she could see that they looked different. And I turned around and said, yes, indeed, they're triplets. It was the longest gestation in human history. My other daughter, who claims she's the quiet one, she was born on June 26th. And she went to college, and she was always had the role in the family as the quiet one. So she was with a friend, and she said to a college friend, and she was talking to him and explaining something. He goes, "Rachel, you may be the quiet one in your family, but you're not quiet." That's the introduction to the Kellerman family. We all talk a lot.
Brooklyn, St. Louis. Let's go back to
Lower East Side, actually.
Lower East Side, yeah. Let's go back to your, anybody here from Brooklyn?
Anybody here from the Lower East Side?
Take us back to your roots and how you ended up where you are today, LA, New Mexico, but take us through that path, where you met, how you met, how'd you come together?
Well, I ended up in LA because my parents moved there when I was 9. The reason that they moved there when I was 9 is my dad came home from World War II. He was a decorated vet. He fought in Battle of the Bulge, raided D-Day, Normandy. Very, very heroic man. He was 3.5 years in combat. And there was no housing for the GIs in New York City. Either the GI Bill hadn't kicked in or was primitive. So my parents ended up living with my mom's parents in a slum tenement on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Then they moved to one room when I was born in a slum in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which is where I was born. My mom said you could put a bottle in one corner, it would roll down. It was one room. They were essentially homeless because they got kicked out of that place. Then they got sent to a tenement in Brooklyn. They got kicked out of that place. They got sent to a tenement in the Bronx. They got kicked out of that place. And we got into the projects in Long Island City. And I remember growing up in the projects in Long Island City. And then they finally got a little house in Queens, and everyone was happy. Neither of my parents had ever owned a house, and the city condemned it for the Clearview Expressway. So my dad said, as long as we're moving to LA, because he had been there. They had taken a road trip before they had me, and he loved it. He was starting an electronics business. So I grew up in LA, and that's how I ended up there in the middle of the year in January. New York was a big storm. LA was 80 degrees. We came off the plane looking like Eskimos, and it was bizarre. Oh, and nobody would rent to a family with 3 little kids, so we lived in a motel for a while. But it was fun. Everything worked out really, really well.
Well, his story kind of mirrors mine. I was born in St. Louis, which is not too far from here. The same thing happened when my dad came back. They lived with my mother's parents for a while. They finally moved out to LA. Originally, my mother didn't like the cold, and they moved to Tucson. And we took a car trip there. I remember that I had 2 older brothers and me, and we were in Tucson. This is kind of giving me a little bit of feedback. And it was really, really nice. And we arrived in Tucson, and it was like 95 in the shade. And everybody kept on asking our parents, oh, who's sick in your family? Because the only people who lived in Arizona at that point were people who had illnesses. So they had no plans. My parents had no plans. So they looked at each other, and it was kind of like a now what do we do with the moment? And they decided, well, let's just go straight to Los Angeles. And they couldn't go any farther because there was an ocean involved. So I essentially grew up. Jonathan and I met at a sports night in a Jewish organization. I think it was either an Onik Shabbat or
We actually met at a place not unlike this, at a Jewish community center.
Yeah, that's right.
In Los Angeles, and she was 18, I was 21.
We've been married for 43 years, so it's been great. I'm my best friend and my best editor.
Well, we have here the Murderer's Door, which is out. We have The Theory of Death, which is coming out October 27th.
Correct.
And then, right on the heels of that, the book you've co-authored with son Jesse, November 3rd, which is the second in the Golem series. This will be the Golem of Paris. The first was Golem of Hollywood. How do you do it? How do you keep, and I hate to use the word cranking them out because they're wonderful quality books.
Yeah.
There's so much in them, but how does that happen?
I got too creative. One book a year is a good pace. That's reasonable. I just got a lot of ideas that I felt like doing, and I got carried away a little bit. We were in Prague. Faye and I took the Orient Express from Venice to Prague. We spent time in Prague, and I was amazed. Have any of you been to Prague? Yeah. So you know what it's like. The Golem myth is really a big deal in Prague. And I was amazed that this Jewish myth essentially has taken over the culture. Like, you can go into a restaurant and have a golem burger made out of pork. It struck me as hilarious. And I was very familiar because I went through the Shiva system about the golem, and I knew it was not true, but I thought how interesting to write a crime novel about that. So I started to write it. On the side, I have my Alex Delaware series novels that I do one a year. I'm disciplined about that. I started doing that. And then it was going to be a huge book, a big scope, and I said, it's just too much. So I kind of put it aside, and Jesse, our son, who's already a best-selling novelist in his own right, very accomplished guy, was visiting, I think it was a Yontif, visiting us with his wife and son, Shavuos or Pesach or something. And I said, I got this book, you want to write with me? He thought about it, he said, yeah, let's give it a try. So we wrote the Golem of Hollywood, now we're doing the Golem of Paris, and Jesse's in China researching the Golem of Shanghai. So it was quite an experience. And then The Murderer's Daughter, the book I have here now, that's just a book I've wanted to write for many, many years. The Delaware novels percolate, but the non-series novels percolate for years and years and years. And I just was very taken with it. What do you do when you're the child of really bad people? How do you deal with that? And I had thought about this and made notes about it, and I created this character, Dr. Grace Blaine. And she is a brilliant, but very troubled, psychologically very unusual woman. And I decided to write a book about her. I didn't tell anybody, I just did it, and my publisher liked it, so they decided to publish it. So here we are. And of course, Faye is doing a couple of books too.
Mm-hmm. When you co-author, you have with each other.
Yes.
And you have with Jesse, you continue to. How does that work? Because when you write, it's perhaps a theater in your mind. You live each character, you take on that role, you speak their language, but when there's two people, how do you share that? How do you step into each other's world to write one book?
I co-authored a book with my daughter when she was 15, and I co-authored a couple of novella books with Jonathan. And with my daughter, it was quite different because she was quite a bit younger. Now she's writing a book on her own. She's currently 23. She's also one of the August 31st one. I was a lot more directive. We sat down with each other, and she was a prickly kind of a girl, but she's very amenable to editing, strangely enough. People can be prickly in one aspect of their lives and be totally open in another aspect of my life, so my kids continue to surprise me every once in a while. With John and I, it was seamless. kicked around ideas back and forth, and then after we had the idea, and then basically the plot and the characters that we wanted in these novels, we did everything by email, everything. Even if we were in the same house, it's like, you know, you carpool with your kids and you have 3 teenagers in the back, and who are you texting? They're texting each other. They're sitting right next to each other, but they're texting each other. That's kind of what we did, and sometimes you could do that. It worked better for us because when you do things in email, there's no emotional contents in it. You just don't see the person's face as they're reading, and you don't see the query in their eyes, or it's not a disconcerting process as it is when they're right in the room reading your material. And it was a pleasure because John was already, as I said, he's my best friend, my best editor. It was wonderful. I would paint myself in a corner and I'd say, okay, I don't quite know what to do. Maybe he has a better idea, and just shove all the misery off to him. And then he'd send it back to me, and it would be very interesting because he'd do something novel with it. And as a result, the book was not his, it was not mine, it was a combination.
And I think the key we learned of collaboration, is the attitude with which you approach it. When I write my own book, it's proprietary. I am very protective. I really don't want anybody telling me anything about it, except for my editor, and she has a light touch. When you collaborate, you have to really accept at the outcome that it is a shared enterprise. And so you just adopt a different approach, and you're not protective, you don't get prickly. It is funny because Faye and I were working in the same house, perhaps 200 feet from each other, but sending emails. But that prepared me for the collaboration with Jesse, who lives in a different city anyway. So that made it really, really easier. We did a lot of meetings, we did a lot of talking, we did planning. In the Golden Hollywood, I had already written about 100 pages, so I knew where I wanted. I just had to write an expanded outline and let him know where I was coming from. Now, the interesting thing is how it evolved. You know, writers have a voice, like artists have a voice. I like to go to a museum and tell who the artist is. I like an artist like Georgia O'Keeffe. I can look at her paintings and know that it's her. The writers that I enjoy are writers I can tell it's this writer, it's that writer. The writers develop a voice, and you can't escape the voice. Even though the Delawares are different, you have your own voice. So when Jesse and I finished The Golem of Hollywood, I decided to send it to Stephen King because he's very supportive, he's a nice guy, and it was my first venture into the supernatural. Even though it really is a crime novel, supernatural. I said, Steve, if you have time. He said, sure, I'd love to read it. And he sent me back, first of all, a beautiful blurb that we used. He just loved it. He said it took his breath away, it was amazing. And then he said something I really appreciate. He said, you know, John, I know your voice, and I know Jesse's voice, and this is a new voice. You've created a hybrid voice. So we knew we'd done a successful job on it. And I have to say, I didn't know what writing with my son was going to be like. I'm close to my son, we get along well. I survived his adolescence, as well as the adolescence of 3 other kids. But turns out it was just not a crossword, not a negative moment. I learned about him as a person, through him as a writer. I thought I was a perfectionist, not in comparison to my son. And it was a wonderful experience, and we've written 2, which is why we decided to do more.
It's very interesting. Families, and Jesse talks about this sometimes, families have different ways of communicating within the family. Some families, his wife's family, Jesse's wife's family, his father-in-law is a scientist. So when the kids were little in my daughter-in-law's families, they communicated with games and puzzles. Our way of talking as a family is in a narrative form. We tell stories. It's not what happened today, and it's a brief sentence. It goes into a story. When we were younger, and before the kids could read and write, you know how it is in nursery. They say, tell us what you learned in the Parshat HaShavua. And if it was something like Moses splitting the Red Sea, they would say, Moses held up his hand and the sea split. And the kid would dictate it to the aide, and the aide would write it down, and then they'd make their little stick figure drawings. We've all seen that, right? You could always tell a Kellerman child. We could tell, and all the adults who had children in the class could tell, because it was, Moses went out to the desert, and there were people trailing behind us, and then he held his hand, and there was fire coming from his eye. Okay, my daughter did this one, obviously. So that's how we do. We dictate, we tell stories, and out of that, I think our voices come through in our novels.
Do you, when you're creating a character, actually role-play? Do you speak in that voice? Do you actually stand up and act it out? Is it, for us, it's theater of the mind, because we read your characters and we have a picture in our minds of what they look like and how they sound, the accents, and how you pace their speeches. Like in Murder's Daughter, 2 beats, 3 beats. You pace it for us and so forth. But do you do that with your characters?
I find myself occasionally talking out loud as I'm writing. I don't set out to do it, but I do occasionally find myself acting very strange in my room while I'm writing these books. I'm actually mouthing the dialogue and assuming a character. This is a female character, Grace. So I'm assuming the role of a 33-year-old woman. And it's just a wonderful experience to be able to do that. You know, people need to understand that writers have kind of a brain damage that will allow us to do this. I mean, it's just, I'll give you a good example. In my first Alex Delaware novel, When the Bow Breaks, which was written in 1981 but didn't come out until 1985 because nobody knew what to do with it, I created the first really mainstream gay character in American literature, Milo Sturgis. I didn't do it because of a political thing, I just did it because I thought it was interesting. And of course, you never know your first novel is going to be your first novel, because I've written many novels that didn't get published. So this book comes out, and I get a lot of nice mail from gay people saying, thank you so much, I love mysteries, I love crime novels, they're so homophobic, blah, 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 blah. And I got some awards, it was very, very nice. Then it kind of morphed to, how can Kellerman, as a straight man, presume to write about the gay experience? And that struck me as kind of a puerile thing, because if I can only write about, well now, elderly Jewish guys with beards, that would kind of limit my work. So what we like to do is be able to put ourselves into all kinds of people, children, all kinds of ethnicities, all genders, and it's a wonderfully liberating experience to be a novelist, because you get to inhabit the skin of all different kinds of people.
Writing is something that you think you're only using one sensation, that's reading, so it's sight. But it really isn't. When you write words on a page, as a writer, you're trying to use all of your sensations. Of course, you're trying to make it seem very, very visual, so as the reader's reading it, he or she is right into that scene. But you also want to make it, what does it sound like? Are there background noises? Is it a horn honking? If it's rural, can you hear animals mooing in the background? Is it noisy? Is it light? Is it a cafe? Is it a crowded cafe? And then you want to hear smell. If it's an urban setting, can you smell the fuel oil? Is there passing a restaurant? Can you smell something? Then you have the way it physically, you use your sight for the scene, but you also have to see how it lays out in a page. There's a rhythm to it. You can't write paragraphs of the same length. It becomes very monotonous to read that. So you write short sentences, and then you write long sentences, and you write clips. Then you put a long paragraph followed by a short. Then you put dialogue in there. And there's a lot of Decker sets in there. You can't have too many Decker sets lining up, because then it looks like, you know, a poem of some Decker said this, Decker said that. It becomes monotonous. So you try to use as many of your sights and your senses to make this a total reading experience, to make this a total sensory experience. And that's very much what I try to do when I'm writing a novel. I construct it, I construct the plot, and of course the characters. People don't remember the plot, although that takes the longest time. But you construct your characters, but you also try to make it as as much as they're in a 3D experience as possible.
And you know, it's really interesting because I think Faye writes some of the best dialogue in the business. And everyone will think that people like Faye and the late Elmore Leonard, it sounds just like people talking. No, it doesn't. If it sounded like people talking, you wouldn't read it. Because there are too many uhs and ers and pauses. But that's the magic, to be able to create something magical that fools people into thinking it's what people sound like.
Absolutely.
And all those sensory things are great. I like to use the word evocative. I want a scene to be evocative to you. I want it to be evocative to me when I'm writing, and hopefully it'll pass on to you. But never to the extent where it breaks up the story and slows down the pace. I'm a visual guy. I paint and I draw, and I did that before I was a writer, so I tend to be a very descriptive guy, but I learned to rein it in, not to overdo it, because it gets in the way of the story. To me, it's all about the story. Like people say, are you going to do another book with Grace if the right story comes along for her?
It is about the story, but John always has a beautiful way of narrating the story. I love his evocative feelings. He really puts you right there in the novel. And that's what we hope to do with all the readers, anybody who reads there. We want you to, first and foremost, enjoy it. If you get a little thought out of it, if it makes you think a little bit, that's great, but we want to entertain. If we really wanted to educate, you're much better off going to a university.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to say about Grace, in addition to being literally a murderer's daughter, and I thought that was a great title, The Murderer's Daughter, I was also taken with why do some people from terribly disadvantaged backgrounds do so well, what we as psychologists call super survivors. This has been a thing that's fascinated me for years. I dealt with it in a novel called Billy Straight that I wrote 10 or 15 years ago, but I really want to get into this. I don't claim to provide the answers. I just think it's interesting to show the process of somebody coming from with so many strikes against her and turning into this kind of amazing person.
What's really great about the book too, John writes literature with a plot. That's how I like to write. He's really a very beautiful writer, and it takes this girl from her girlhood to her womanhood and how she became what she became. And it's done seamlessly. It's a very interesting journey. Of course, he's a psychologist, so he writes very interesting material.
That said, without this turning into a love fest, I need to be a psychologist, because when I read Faye's scenes about families, and we didn't prepare any of this, honestly, I'm always impressed. I'm always impressed. Because, you know, Faye trained to be a best-selling novelist in a very methodical manner. She got a bachelor's degree in theoretical mathematics, and then she got a DDS. She's a dentist. So you can see this is just the easiest way to become a novelist. So I had no idea she had any interest in writing, talking about how we both became writers. I was the more typical guy. I was the failed writer with a good day job. I've been writing since I was a kid, compulsively, always writing. Wrote a lot of stuff, published a lot of stuff, but was rejected as a novelist. You know, I published scientific articles and this and that, but I was just a struggling writer until I finally got good enough. It wasn't like there was a conspiracy to keep me out of American publishing. I got good enough and I got published. But I had no idea that she was doing this. And during my first 5 novels, I was still going to the office to see patients as a psychologist, so I was gone. So a sneaky little person here decided to work on her writing while I was gone. I had no idea. No idea. One day she thrust this sheaf of papers at me, and I just sold my first novel. It hadn't come out yet, 85. She said, "Read this, you won't like it." And I said, "Hell yeah." I mean, I got a lot. Why would I? You've got to be kidding me. Miss Math Genius here is writing a book. And it was good. It was great. And so I called my agent, and I had no clout. I hadn't even come out yet. I sold the book for a very small advance. I was by no means a hotshot publishing. I said, "I know what it sounds like, but my wife wrote a book." And his eyes rolled back in his head, and then he read it and like, "Didn't she publish it?" So I always thought she's not a real writer because she has no rejection slips.
However, I would like to correct something in the introduction. I was saying to Jonathan, the Ritual Bath, that was the Ritual Bath, which has since been republished. It did not come out to acclaimed reviews, and it did not come out to commercial success. It sold, they printed, I think, 1,700. And it sold about 900. That's like one bookstore per state almost. So, but at that time, this goes into the world of publishing. There were 26 major publishing houses. Now there's about 7. You know, everything conglomerated, and it's. I know that there's e-books and people are publishing, mass publishing. But it's really a shame that all these publishing houses have conglomerated to the point where it's harder for first novels to sell because there's less places to sell them to. And the e-books are very, very good in regards that your books never go out of print. But you can't just e-book yourself and sell it. There's a whole industry, and I think we're missing a lot of good books out there because my publisher, I didn't sell the first time, but it was a small industry and they didn't give me a very big advance, so they were willing to work with me. Now in book publishing as well as movies and films and television, if you don't get that smack right away, you're done with. So it's a problem.
It's become more like the record business, unfortunately.
You started talking about Dr. Grace Blaze and in terms of the family aspect of it and parenting. But this is something I wanted to talk to both of you about because it really struck me in that we have a character who, and I won't give it away for those of you who haven't read it yet, who has experienced very serious trauma young. Yet, people begin coming into her life who begin to give her love and care for her. And we start to see remarks from outsiders who are encountering her. Well, that's a switch. Usually kids are demanding. Or Sophie says, when she's with Sophie and Malcolm, puts down the silver salad fork and says, honestly, dear, don't sell yourself short. You know more than you think you do. Yes, experience is important, but you can gain that. This is funny. All the experience in the world won't help an idiot. Well, what we see here, though, is a wonderful thread that I found very tender in a book of crime and mystery is that mentoring, that parenting, even adopted children, people who are foster parents. That environment, that nurture versus nature, which was wonderful in your book too, I had highlighted that. Is that something purposeful that you're teaching us as parents? I'm sure everyone here is probably a parent or will be soon. Is that a message you work to put out? Because I
never write a message book. The story and the character kind of tell me where to go with it. I thought a lot about Grace. I thought about it for years before I wrote this book. Sitting for years. And I said, there's no way she can do it without some kind of mentoring. I mean, otherwise, it's just not going to happen. And she doesn't develop into what we would call a conventional human being. I won't try to give her a diagnosis, but she's high functioning. But you just need that. You know, the interesting thing about the book is, before the book came out, my publisher asked me to do an e-short, which is a little e-only short story as a presage to the book. And I didn't really want to do it. I said, well, you can introduce the character. I said, it won't work with this book. I followed this character literally from birth. What do you want me to write about a fetus? But the publisher wisely said, why did you write about Malcolm Bluestone, who's her mentor? So I wrote I wrote a short about Malcolm when he was younger, and that was interesting. but she is covered, she's really covered from birth. But, I mean, Faye is a wonderful mother. She's a grandmother. She understands how families work. She knows what it's like, and that's why the book is informed. Her book, Theory of Death, is informed like that. That's that.
I can write about kids of any age because I've had kids of all ages. Now I have grandchildren of all ages. We had kids in our 20s, 30s, and 40s. And then in our 50s we had grandchildren. So we kind of have learned, our kids have been their mentors and our teachers as well as the other way around.
Well, a big takeaway for me, and I hope for everybody here, is showing how we treat our children and how we can push them. It's okay. They're a lot smarter, a lot more intuitive than we give them credit for. Whether or not they
no doubt about that.
got a traumatic childhood, they're capable of great things.
Well, that's because both animals and children get smarter as scientists get better at measuring their behavior. Well, it's true. William James, the psychologist at Harvard, is a philosopher, father of modern psychology, described infancy as a blooming, buzzing confusion. It was to him, but then when we developed something called the tachistoscope in the 50s, which was this machine that can actually follow an infant's eyes and tell what they're paying attention to, they got a hell of a lot smarter. Same thing with animals. As we measure them, we find that like birds don't just parrot back. They actually use language in a structured way. So I think a lot of organisms are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. We just need to learn how to observe.
Yeah, I go along.
And I love working with kids. I was a child clinical psychologist, and I was always fascinated. And a lot of my job was working with very traumatized kids. So I developed a specialty in it. And it's something that I've always wanted to write about because you just see people coping in so many different ways.
Kids were always part of Jonathan's life as a child psychologist and writing with families. And I chose to write, my Dick Arena series deals with families because when I first developed the series, I tried a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then I decided to kind of write what I knew. And I didn't think having a dentist solve crimes was a very viable series option. So I wrote what I knew, and I knew families, and I knew my religion, and I love families, and I love my religion. And when you're writing, as John says, your first novel, you don't know it's your first novel. So you really write, you kind of throw the kitchen sink in it because you're just having fun with it. A little bit later on, you become way more disciplined, and even with your first novel, most first novels are quite undisciplined compared to subsequent works. Because you're having, as I said, you're having fun, and you're just kind of throwing things in there. But I consider writing about families still a pleasure. I like the interaction of the family as a unit, and I like the human psyche, and I do hope it comes across in my novels as something more than just an Agatha Christie solving the puzzle.
Well, we see Peter and we see Rena taking in Tyler McAdams, and as mentors too. It's a beautiful thing what they've done and how they support each other, can joke around with each other.
When I was in high school, I don't know why my parents agreed to it. I had a friend who had a very hard life, a brilliant friend, and they agreed to take her in. I said she has no place to go. I think her father was somewhere and her mother committed suicide. Really a tragic story. She came out okay. I think I lost contact with her. But they agreed. I said she has no place to go. I mean, they're splitting up the family. Can she stay here until the term's over? And they agreed. I thought that was tremendously generous of them as I look back, because it's hard enough with your own children.
It was a tiny house, too. Tiny house.
Tiny little house. We had a railroad room. I had two brothers who had to get to their room by crossing through my room. So I think that made a big impact on me, and made a big impact on my character, Rena, who is one of the books in there, one of the quotes in there, and he goes, "Why are you always picking up downtrodden strays?" And she is. She picks up strays, and that's the kind of person I guess I was. And it comes into them. They were in Los Angeles, Peter and Rena, for many, many years, and I decided to move them to upstate New York in a fictitious college town, trying to invoke, to inject the series with a little bit of a different angle and a little bit more youth, and I love it. It made me very excited to write the books again.
And she gets to use some of her brilliant mathematical ability.
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
This college that she writes about is a consortium of different colleges,
Correct.
right? And this one is the Math Science College.
Right.
So
The first one in Murder
interesting
101
things, yeah.
was the art college.
Was the Arts College, yeah. You know, talking about picking up strays, we have a cat that comes into our yard because it loves Faye. It's a wild cat. It's not anybody's cat, and it just loves. It lives in our property, and every so often shows up till Faye pets it. Sometimes it doesn't even want food. It's the funniest thing.
Yeah.
If we go away for a month, the cat goes away. I asked the housekeeper, is the cat still? No. And we come back, the cat comes back and wants his face.
We have a good time.
So speaking of theoretical math,
Okay.
there were some interesting words in here that I had to look up. That I never heard. But I'm curious, you know, we're reading a book of fiction, and then we come across things like the Kessler syndrome, and also the rest of it I can't pronounce, but
Disambiguation.
that. So you inject some reality here. So if you would explain to us, what is the Kessler syndrome? Because I'm curious, did you put this in here because it's something that you're passionate about, this concept of space junk?
It just kind of, Kessler, who here has seen the movie Gravity? Okay, so most of you. In the movie, George Clooney and Sandra Bullock are working away on something, and they get beamed by a rock, and it makes their spaceship go off, and then she gets thrown, and and then she's alone. That's basically what Kessler syndrome is. It's one force in the universe colliding into another force that causes that thing to collide into another force that causes that body to collide until you have this doomsday scenario. And nothing like that happens in the book, thank goodness. They live to return to another adventure. But I have always been interested in math and science, and I wanted to relate my interest into something that was accessible to everybody out there. I did have to tone it down a little bit, but it does have to do with, the book starts out with a math prodigy committing suicide and moves on from there. So we learn all about the wonderful world of mathematics and physics, but in a very, very tame way.
You know, the sad thing, Faye is 3 years younger than I. Had I known her when I was struggling through math in college, it would have been very helpful. I didn't meet her until I graduated college.
Well, we're also introduced to this academic world that is filled with very, very bright, brilliant people, but it's also very competitive.
That is true. I mean, it had to do, Jonathan was in the world of academics for a while. Tell him about the Parker quote.
It wasn't Parker, it was someone else. Why is academia so venal and backbiting? Because so little is at stake. And Bob Parker, the Spencer series, you guys read the Spencer books? You know, Bob passed away. He was a professor of English at Boston College. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the University of Southern California Medical School. So he met me first time in Chicago 15, 20 years ago. First thing he said, "You're too smart to live in Los Angeles," which I thought was very nice. But then he said, "John, you're a professor. I'm a professor. Being a professor is bullshit." But I think being a professor is great, but it is a tough world out there. There's no question.
It's fun to write about people who are, it's always fun to write about people who are more venal than people who are nice. When he switched from academic medicine into writing, and when I started writing, I got to tell you, the crime writers, the fictional crime writers, the suspense writers, are the nicest bunch of supportive people you ever want to meet. They're really, really lovely, as compared to a lot of other writers who are very competitive. Probably because crime writers have done other things, they've worked other jobs. So we're all so grateful to be where we are, whereas I think literary novelists have staked so much in their ability to write this 1 or 2 books. They write with their, it's more of their identity. I like to write a good book as much as anybody does, but I have a whole identity outside of being a writer. So I've just found them to be lovely people like Sue Grafton. We all kind of grew up together. Nancy Picard, who writes down here, James Lee Burke. I mean, I've corresponded with him. I'm a huge fan. He writes these Louisiana novels that are just dripping with atmosphere. They're Faulkner with a plot. And they're just lovely, lovely people.
And when our son published his first novel, and it was interesting, you would think you're the son of 2 best-selling novelists, it's going to be easier to get published, right? It was hard. I was waiting for nepotism to kick in. I was so frustrated because I thought he was such a talented guy. I published with Random House, a huge conglomerate, Faye's with Harper and Morrow, neither of which were really interested in reading Jesse's book because they just thought it was too complicated. What if they turned him down? We'd get mad. So he was really kind of locked out of a lot of publishing houses, made it harder, got his own agent, got his own deal. And on his own, then, they sent the book to other crime writers. Everyone was so nice to him. Lee Child, Harlan Coben, Stephen King, Bob Parker, Sue Grafton. Everyone was really extended themselves to Jess. And people we don't know, as well as people we do know. So I thought it was just extremely gracious and kind, and we try to be kind to other writers.
He's also friendly with the second generation.
Yeah, with Stephen King's son, Owen.
Yeah, Alifar Berg, you know, who's done that. And they often ask him when the 3 of us tour together. We 3 of us do tour together. We're doing a lot, and we're doing a couple spots in November. They ask him about what's it like to be our son, so he refers over to Owen King, who gets asked the same question, what's it like to be the son of Stephen King? He says, put it this way, he goes, I know what the first line of my obituary is going to be. So it is a tough road to hoe, but thank goodness Jesse is multi-talented, and I don't think he could have written the book with Jonathan that he did had he not had 5 of his own novels published beforehand.
And a screenwriter, too.
Well, he's a playwright. Yeah, he won the Princess Grace Award for Best Young Playwright several years ago. And he's a very accomplished writer, and it's the only reason I could have written with him. I wouldn't write with him otherwise. And our youngest, Lizzie, is 23, and she did write a book with Faye when she was 15. She wrote the book during her junior year of high school, and Faye did the editing, but she wrote it. And she's been employed as an editor and a full-time writer since graduating from college. So two of the kids seem to have that desire. And our other 2 daughters are PhD clinical psychologists. So.
There is something about the...
You know, it's very interesting about psychology. This was a new experience. A couple of months ago, I was privileged to be asked to deliver the keynote address at the American Psychological Association convention. It was in Toronto. And, you know, I haven't practiced psychology since 1990, and I'm really not in touch with my former profession. But I went to Toronto when Faye came and we did a speech, and I met a lot of psychologists. And there were a whole lot of them. I don't know if any of you are psychologists, but a whole lot of them have kids, grandkids, parents, or grandparents who are psychologists. It seems to be a profession that is passed out. And contrary to stereotype, most of them seem to like their parents and like their kids, seem to get along and be doing quite well. It could be a biased sample. But there may be just a genetic thing there. I don't know. I just don't know.
All right, we're going to switch it up.
Yep.
I'm going to come out with some short questions. So this is called, like, it's not quite 20 questions because it's 17, but sort of rapid fire.
Sure.
First answers that come to mind. Okay, we have some fun.
Both of us?
Both.
Okay, you go first.
Well,
We're going to answer, he's going to ask the same question.
well, the first question, some will be to both of you. So Jonathan, the first question for you. Where is Alex Delaware right now, and what is he doing?
He is obsessing on something. He's in his house in Beverly Glen, obsessing on something. I don't know what yet, but
Okay.
trust me, he's obsessing.
Faye, Peter and Rena, what did they just make for Friday night Shabbos dinner?
Well, I just ended something and they just came back right before Shabbos, so she took something out of the freezer and stuffed it in the oven really fast. I think it was a chicken with rice.
Okay. What's the last movie you've seen?
A documentary on the folk singers of Greenwich Village is the last thing I saw, called Greenwich Village.
I don't remember the last thing I saw. I honestly don't remember.
It's been a while. We don't see a lot of
We
movies.
don't see a lot of movies. Sometimes I watch them when they're on the exercise. I can't think of it.
What's the last book that you read?
Okay, that I can answer. It was called Blue Spool of Thread by Ann Tyler. I think it's the new book that just came out.
Do you prefer hardcover or Kindle or tablet?
Hardcover.
Don't have a Kindle.
Organic, vegan, vegetarian?
Why? I saw, there was a movie I saw, I'm going to offend somebody, but in jest, I saw this French movie years ago, and this chef goes, vegetarians are people who are afraid of death. But whatever you want to eat is fine. I mean, our daughters always got through, you were a vegetarian when I met you.
I was.
I think a lot of women go through that stage. It's a great thing. I think it's really the Jewish ideal is to be a vegetarian.
How
There's
can
no
we be
doubt.
a vegetarian if we're eating barbecue tomorrow? It's not barbecue tofu.
Faye and I are both blessed with very good, unusual cholesterol patterns, so we really don't worry too much.
And in California, we are really blessed. Even in Los Angeles, you just go a little bit north, there are beautiful, beautiful farmers markets there. We are very, very lucky. This is kind of the breadbasket of the U.S. too. No? You don't grow a lot of, yes or no? Yes. We have, there's a place called Oxnard, it's farms and farms of fresh vegetables. So even if it's not organic, it's good.
Just curious. You know, it's funny because when we read your books and we wonder how much of you is here. So both books have a couple of mentions of it. I was just...
I respect people who do it.
Are you currently binging anything on Netflix?
We're watching a wonderful series. We do watch TV. It's called The Last Detective. We subscribe to Acorn, which I was telling you about, for $5 a month. It's the best of British television, and we love British television because the acting is so great. They're trained actors, and their series are not, they're run through commercials, but it's a part 1, part 2, part 3, so that you really have a chance to develop the character. This is a guy named Peter Davidson, and not only is he a great actor, but all the ancillary characters are wonderful.
My favorite show, I think the best television show I've ever watched is one that you have maybe, it's Foyle's War. Foyle's War. Fabulous. It's a wonderful Michael Kitchen, who's a brilliant actor. Low-key plays a detective during World War II. In Hastings, England, and he's solving crimes against the backdrop of World War II. And it's written by a brilliant writer named Anthony Horowitz, who turns out might be a distant cousin of mine, and we've corresponded, and it's wonderful. So that's the kind of thing we like to watch. I like to read and watch a lot of nonfiction. I find fiction distracting, and I don't watch American crime stuff because it is distracting, and I don't care for it, actually.
Describe your ideal date night.
Anything with Jonathan.
And we go out a lot. We always, even when we had kids, I knew as a psychologist it was really important. We always make sure to go out twice a week without the kids, Sunday and Thursday generally. So a great date is being with Faye, having a great dinner with a cocktail or two before, basically.
Favorite libation?
Libation.
We drink kosher wine, and we have quite a bit. We collect kosher wine, so I love wine, red wine, Zin.
We have a lot. We have probably 1,000 bottles of really good kosher wine. It goes back 20 years. My cocktail of choice is in Manhattan with Knob Creek. That's what I like.
Who's the better cook?
I don't cook at all, so I mean, I just don't cook.
I'm also the worst cook.
She's a fantastic cook. I met Faye, she was 18, and man, our first year of marriage, I gained 15 pounds. It hasn't stopped since, but she is a great cook. Gourmet level, really, and I have no interest in it at all. Right?
Yes.
What's tops in your bucket list of destinations you want to visit?
We've been blessed as a lot of that bucket list has been checked off. Very, very fortunate to have been to a lot of different places. Our most recent trip was through Asia, where we went to China, Japan, and South Korea, Seoul, South Korea. I would like to eventually see Aurora Borealis. And we've often talked about seeing Athens. I don't know if it's the right time just yet, but the ancient Greek history is I love history, so that's
Asia was an amazing experience. We've been there twice. We've been to Vietnam, nicest people in the world. I said, how come you don't hate Americans? Because my whole youth was taken up by the Vietnam War. She goes, we're Buddhists, we move on, we don't bear a grudge. And they mean it. They're very friendly. Hong Kong, amazing place. Singapore. You want to tell about our experience in Shanghai, China?
Yeah, do you have a moment?
Sure.
Do you have a moment?
Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah,
We went to Shanghai. Have any of you been to Shanghai? It's a fantastic city. 28 million people conservative. It's like they invited the greatest architects in the world to do whatever you want. You got 80-story building, looks like a can opener. But they saved 24,000 Jews during the Holocaust. People of Shanghai, they're very proud of it. And there's a museum in the synagogue. Interestingly enough, the synagogue there, they faced west when they pray, because Jerusalem is west. So you go and they list all the names of these people, and there's like, a computer that lists all these 24,000 Jews that were saved by the Chinese. They're very proud of it. And most of them are from Vienna and Germany. They saved the whole Mir Yeshiva walk from Lithuania to China. And I had rabbis when I was studying who lived in Shanghai. And our guide was a young Chinese woman named Zoe, and she said, well, why don't you guys put it on the computer so you can find a relative? And we said, it's not going to happen. My family's been in America since 1902. Faye's grandfather was in America in the 1800s. Her family came in the 1800s. Her grandfather fought for America in World War I. We know we lost distant relatives, but, and we plug in her name, and the first thing comes up is a great uncle. And we never knew what happened to him. And her grandmother, had heard a story about her brother who jumped off the train to Auschwitz. We never knew what happened to him. And there he was, and we burst into tears. We just burst into spontaneous tears. It was to go to China 10,000 miles away and to plug on a computer and find a long-lost relative was an absolutely amazing experience.
And he made it to Israel, and he died at 92. So.
Wow.
So that was quite a experience.
That's beautiful. Where were you, and describe the scene, when you both had made the New York Times bestseller, when you made history? Where were you? Describe that moment.
With both of us?
Yeah.
It wasn't a big deal.
I remember the first time I made it, we were having some sort of heated political discussion in the car, and my editor called me, and I guess we had cell phones back then, the car phones, and she told me that I made the list.
My situation, I was fortunate that my first novel made the New York Times list, and everyone since. So I was seeing patients, and I was a psychologist of this 50-minute hour, this 45-minute hour, in between charting. So I was charting, and a phone call came in from my agent in New York. And he said, John, you made the list. And I go, what list is that? I didn't know. I didn't expect that. This book was not bought as a bestseller. He paid me $3 an hour to write that book, literally. And he said, the New York Times list. I said, oh, is that a big deal? So I was seeing patients. I was concerned with my patients. The thing I learned about it, though, was I think the book came out at number 10, and then my publisher said, you know, we know you're selling more than a book that's number 5, but that's the New York Times list. So I learned about the New York Times list right up at that one. But in terms of both of us,
I don't remember.
we didn't make a big deal about it. I mean, it was just kind of a nice thing.
The happiest that I have ever been was when his agent called him up and said his book was accepted for publication. That I remember, it was in our old house, and I remember holding the phone and literally screaming and jumping up and down, because he had worked for 9 years and had 13 unpublished manuscripts.
13 years and 9 of them.
13 years and 9 unpublished manuscripts, and I was so happy. And that's when the bow breaks. So, you never know.
All right. Is Dancing with the Stars in your future?
How about Tripping with the Stars?
We do like to dance, but no, I mean, no, we do
Fetching
dance.
with the Stars. You know,
We do dance, actually.
I'm
We like-
63, he's 66, and I'd like to think we look good and we're very, but the body just doesn't perform like it did when it was in the 20s. The first hurl, my hip would be out, I'd be in traction, so the answer to that is probably no.
But you were thinking about it. It took you a long time to get around to that.
Yeah, I'd really like to do that if I were 40 years younger.
Book-related question. Dr. Grace Blades meets Alex briefly. Is that a hint of what's to come?
No, I just felt it was a fun thing to bring him in, and I felt that it was normal because they went to the same school and she wouldn't meet him. So I just thought it would be an appropriate way, and I thought it would be interesting for all my readers who read all the Delaware novels to see him viewed by someone else. To me, that's kind of interesting. I'm always trying to keep it interesting for you and for me. I don't know what the future is. I'm afraid. I don't know.
Final question. Faye, I should put my glasses on for this. Fourier analysis.
Fourier.
Sorry, you can pronounce it wrong.
Yeah.
Eigenvalues, eigenvectors, oscillator algorithms. Does this excite you?
Yeah, it does. I wouldn't have written about it if it didn't. It allowed a little bit of, and I do explain it. Fourier analysis is something that's used a lot in physics, and it has to do with the plot of this book. And I hope it's accessible to you guys. If it isn't, I have a website, let me know.
I guess as the protective husband in me wants to rest assured this is not a math book.
Yes.
This is an exciting crime novel with some math stuff in it.
With
That's
a
very
lot of math
interesting,
people
even
in
to
it.
a math dummy like me. So
Yeah,
I can
I-
understand it, you can understand.
You don't want to. You don't want to be a lecturer, as I said. Go to college instead. But if I can bring it in a very fun way, in an exciting way, and make you think, hey, I learned something. That's pretty good.
Yeah. No, it was great. And I didn't mean to insinuate that. It was fun to see that and to learn new things and to
Good.
meet people, meet characters who are comfortable in that environment, that world.
Yeah, I know. They're pretty nerdy, aren't they?
Yeah.
But they're fun.
I think that's all the time we
Stuart,
have.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's see how we're doing on time. Here comes Amy.
Well, does anyone, maybe 1 or 2 questions? Nobody came forward. Can you say it really loud? Go ahead.
Why no movie with Ellis and Milo?
Why
All right, the movie question rears its ugly head. No, I don't know. We had a TV movie of When the Bow Breaks, hugely successful, 3rd highest rated movie of the week that NBC ever did. You'd think they'd be beating down the doors. For a while I didn't want television, just wanted features. Then we had a TV series going. Warner Brothers and Fox bought it from Bruckheimer. Last minute they canceled. I've had so many deals fall through. I just don't know. I don't know. It seems to me it would make a great movie, a great television series.
I must interject that I think Dr. Grace Blades would make a great superhero.
Well, I mean,
Thank you. That's what I've always called you. She's a superhero.
As my agent, my film agent describes Grace Blade very well. He says, when she's in trouble, doesn't call 911. And he claimed to me last week some guy was going to make an offer, but it's Hollywood. I mean, you just can't deal with it. You just don't know. It's a very ephemeral business, and the reason things are done are very confusing. So I don't know.
Any other people? Yep.
Is there a book that you've read that you think should be on everybody's bookshelf?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting.
Well, certainly The Count of Monte Cristo. That was formative for me when I was, and I like the novels of the late, great Ross MacDonald, who was a crime writer during the 50s and 60s. And my favorite book of his is called The Chill. I think it's an amazing, amazing novel. But I'm reading Einstein's biography by Walter Isaacson. Very interesting. I learned that all that stuff about Einstein flunking out of school and being a dummy is nonsense. He was always smart and everyone knew it.
I agree with Ross MacDonald. He is the godfather of the American noir crime novel. I hate to say this, but I think the best novel in the world, or book in the world rather, is the Bible. I mean, there is so much intrigue in everything, and it says so much about everything that read the Chumash. and you can read all of Tanakh, you know, Chumash and the prophets and all the stories. Look at the book of Esther. How much intrigue is that?
Persians wanting to destroy us? What a strange story. Thank you.
Any last minute questions? Yes, one more.
When you begin a novel, do you know what the entire plot is going to be, and do you know what all of your characters are going to wind up doing, or do you just start writing with a plot and then just go and see where it goes?
Both.
Both.
I mean, and I'm not being funny. You want to
No,
address?
go ahead. Really good.
Both of us outline, and we're very structured. The outlines vary. I've done outlines that are 10-page outlines that are 100 pages, but we think we know what we're doing. The reason why I say it's both is because then you finish the book, you've written a totally different book. So the characters take on their own lives. But it does help to know where you're going. That, at least in my experience, has taken writer's block out of my life. I've never experienced it. People ask about writer's block. Once you're outlined, it's like building a house. You're framing it. If you just do the decoration without a framework, it's going to fall apart. Speaking of writer's block, another quote from the late great Bob Barker. When you call a plumber, does he say I can't come because I have plumber's block? So we don't mess with that stuff. We don't get too neurotic and self-important. But both of us, I think, do you want to add to that?
No, that's perfect.
But honestly, that's the wonderful thing. You think you have the structure, and you know where it's going to end, but characters surprise you. I've had people I thought were good guys turn out to be bad guys, and vice versa. I've changed things, but still, I overall know what my story is. It's a good question. Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to walk out, and if y'all would please go in the lobby. We have a wonderful dessert reception by Holy Cow, and they'll be available. There'll be books for purchase, and they'll be there to sign. So thank you so much for being here.